Natalie Harper had never imagined herself becoming the other woman. She had spent her life avoiding complications. She worked quietly, kept a small circle of friends, and preferred evenings at home to crowded restaurants or noisy parties. There was nothing reckless about her. That was what made Daniel Reeves so dangerous. He entered her life slowly. They met through his business, when Natalie was helping with a project involving one of his properties. Daniel was confident without seeming arrogant, attentive without appearing desperate. He remembered small details about her, asked about her mother, noticed when she changed her hairstyle. At first, Natalie dismissed his interest. Then he began staying behind after meetings. One evening, while rain tapped against the office windows, Daniel admitted that his marriage was falling apart. "My wife and I have been living separate lives for years," he said. Natalie hesitated. "Then why are you still married?" Daniel looked toward the window before answering. "Because leaving isn't as simple as people think." He spoke about arguments, loneliness, financial complications, and a wife who, according to him, had stopped loving him long ago. Natalie listened because his pain seemed genuine. She did not realize that he had practiced this explanation many times. Their first kiss happened weeks later. Afterward, Natalie felt guilty. Daniel did not. He held her hand and promised that their relationship was different. "I'm going to leave her," he whispered. "I just need time." Those words became everything to Natalie. Natalie believed him. For several months, their relationship existed in hidden spaces, quiet dinners far from his neighborhood, hotel rooms booked under Daniel's name, long phone calls after midnight. He sent affectionate messages during the day and promised that someday they would live openly. Whenever Natalie asked when that day would come, Daniel had another explanation. His wife was going through something difficult. The timing was wrong. His lawyer had advised patience. There were financial matters to settle. Natalie accepted each excuse because accepting them was easier than admitting she might have been deceived. But contradictions began appearing. Daniel said he had stopped sleeping with his wife, yet he sometimes disappeared for entire weekends without explanation. He claimed they were preparing to separate, but Natalie noticed pictures of them attending family events together. When she questioned him, his warmth vanished. "You don't understand what I'm dealing with," he said. "I understand that I'm waiting." "You knew what this was." Natalie lowered her eyes. She hated arguments, especially with Daniel. Somehow every confrontation ended with her apologizing for asking reasonable questions. Still, something inside her was changing. One afternoon, Daniel left his phone unattended while they were having coffee. A notification appeared from a contact saved only as home. Natalie did not open it. She didn't need to. The message read, "Dinner tonight? Laura wants to talk about the vacation." Vacation. Dinner. Laura. Natalie stared at the screen until Daniel returned. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. That night, Natalie searched online for Daniel's divorce attorney. She found nothing. Then she checked public court records and discovered there was no divorce filing, no separation agreement, no pending case. Nothing. The promise Daniel had repeated for months suddenly looked different. It was not delayed. It might never have existed. Natalie sat alone in her apartment, staring at the evidence on her laptop while rain traced silver lines down the glass. For the first time, she wondered whether Daniel had ever intended to choose her. And somewhere inside that question was another, more frightening one. What would happen if she stopped believing him? His expression changed instantly. He stood, said something to Laura, and hurried outside. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I could say the same thing. This isn't what you think." Natalie almost laughed. "Then tell me what it is." Daniel lowered his voice. "Laura and I have responsibilities. We have history. That doesn't mean I love her. Natalie looked through the window at Laura. She seems to love you. Daniel's jaw tightened. Don't make this harder. That became his favorite phrase. Whenever Natalie asked questions, he accused her of making things harder. Whenever she mentioned Laura, he insisted that she was interfering with a situation she could not understand. But Natalie was beginning to understand something important. Laura did not know. That realization became heavier than the affair itself. Natalie imagined Laura returning home that evening, believing her husband had spent the day at work. She imagined Laura planning vacations, trusting Daniel, perhaps telling friends that their marriage had survived difficult years. Every lie Natalie had accepted now seemed to have another victim attached to it. When Natalie told Daniel she was considering ending their relationship, his behavior changed. At first, he became tender. He brought flowers. He called repeatedly. He reminded her of everything they had shared and promised that their future was close. Then the tenderness disappeared. You need to be careful, he told her one night. Is that a threat? No. It's advice. What am I supposed to be careful about? Daniel stared at her. You don't know what exposing this could do. My business could suffer. My family could fall apart. Your life could become very unpleasant. Natalie's stomach tightened. You're blaming me for your lies. I'm warning you about consequences. After that, Natalie began keeping screenshots of his messages. She saved photographs, recorded dates, and wrote down every promise he had made about leaving Laura. Fear was slowly replacing affection. The relationship that once felt secret and exciting now felt like a trap. One evening, Natalie sat alone in her apartment and opened a blank message addressed to Laura. She typed 3 words. Your husband is cheating. Her hands trembled above the keyboard. She knew sending it could destroy everything. But she also knew that remaining silent meant helping Daniel continue the lie. Natalie looked at Laura's name for several minutes. Then she whispered, You deserve to know. She did not yet know that telling Laura would not simply end the affair. It would expose Daniel's darkest fear and place Natalie in danger. And with one decision, the secret Daniel had spent so long protecting was finally moving toward the woman who had been kept outside it. Natalie stared at Laura's name until the silence in her apartment became unbearable. She remembered Daniel telling her that Laura would never understand, that his wife was controlling, bitter, and determined to keep him trapped. But now Natalie understood that those stories had been designed to make betrayal easier. She pressed send. The message was simple. Your husband has been having an affair with me. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Laura replied, Who are you? Natalie sent photographs first. Daniel's arm around her at a restaurant. A picture from a weekend hotel stay. Screenshots of messages in which Daniel promised that he loved Natalie and intended to leave his wife. Finally, Natalie wrote details Laura could verify. Daniel's favorite room at a particular hotel, the business trip that had never been a business trip, and the necklace he had given Natalie for her birthday. Laura stopped responding. Across town, she sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the photographs on her phone. The house around her looked exactly as it always had. Daniel's coffee mug sat beside the sink. His jacket hung near the door. A framed wedding photograph stood on the bookshelf. Everything suddenly looked like evidence. When Daniel came home, Laura was waiting. Who is Natalie Harper? He froze. Only for a second. Then his expression hardened. I don't know what you're talking about. Laura placed her phone on the table. Then explain this. Daniel glanced at the photographs. His first instinct was denial. They're fake. All of them? Yes. Laura opened the messages. Is this your number? Daniel said nothing. Her voice broke. You told me you were working late. I was. You were with her. Daniel finally sat down. She means nothing. Laura stared at him. Then why did you tell her you loved her? He looked away. Laura began crying, but Daniel did not comfort her. Instead, he became angry. This is what happens when you believe strangers. She knew things about us. She was obsessed with me. Laura shook her head. No. She knew things because you told her. Daniel stood abruptly. Natalie wanted to destroy us. You destroyed us. The word stopped him. For the first time, Daniel looked frightened. But Laura was too devastated to notice. She asked how long it had lasted. Daniel refused to answer. She asked whether he planned to leave her. Again, silence. Finally, Laura whispered, Was anything between us real? Daniel looked at her, and his answer was almost inaudible. Of course. But Laura no longer believed him. That night, Natalie expected relief. Instead, Daniel called. She almost ignored him. When she answered, there was no tenderness in his voice. You crossed a line. Natalie swallowed. I told her the truth. You had no right. She had every right to know. Daniel's breathing became heavier. You don't understand what you've done. I understand exactly what I did. No, Natalie. You don't. There was something different in his voice. Not anger alone. Fear. Now, you should have stayed quiet. She read them again the following morning, then placed her phone face down on the kitchen table. Sunlight filled the apartment, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every sound outside made her look toward the window. Every unfamiliar engine made her wonder whether Daniel had found her. Over the next week, his messages became more frequent. You ruined everything. You don't understand what you've done. Laura will never forgive me because of you. Natalie stopped responding. Silence seemed safer. But Daniel did not stop. One afternoon, she noticed a dark sedan parked across from her building. The driver remained inside for nearly an hour. When Natalie stepped outside, the vehicle disappeared. 2 days later, another unfamiliar car appeared. She began taking different routes home. She checked the locks twice before sleeping. She stopped telling people where she was going. The woman who had once waited impatiently for Daniel's calls now feared seeing his name on her screen. Across town, Laura was living through a different kind of collapse. She had moved into the guest room and barely spoke to Daniel. Every memory had become suspicious. A business trip she once admired now seemed like an excuse. Every late night, every unexplained expense, every sudden change in his behavior acquired a new meaning. How long? She finally asked him. Daniel stood in the doorway. You're believing her over me? I'm asking how long. Instead of answering, he sighed. She manipulated you. Laura stared at him. She sent me proof. She wanted revenge. Daniel repeatedly presented himself as the victim. He told Laura that Natalie had become obsessed with him, that she threatened to expose private information, and that the affair had been an emotional mistake he was trying to escape. You should have stayed quiet. Natalie's breath caught. She stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Outside, headlights passed slowly across her curtains. She did not move. For several seconds, she listened to the silence. Then another thought entered her mind. Maybe Daniel was not trying to frighten her anymore. Maybe he was preparing to make her disappear. She reached for the phone but stopped herself. Calling someone felt necessary, yet choosing whom to trust seemed impossible. Daniel had spent months making her doubt her judgment. She walked through every room, checking windows and doors. Nothing appeared disturbed. The threat was invisible, and close enough to make ordinary life feel like a warning. Natalie sat completely beside her bed. She wished she had never met him. Yet the truth was already out. There was no way to put it back. Natalie knew she could not remain in the city. After the message from Daniel, fear had settled into every ordinary moment. She checked the street before leaving work. She looked behind her while driving home. At night, she kept her phone beside her pillow, fully charged and ready. By Friday morning, she had made a decision. She would leave. Not forever. Just long enough to breathe, think, and decide what to do next. A friend had offered her a spare room several hours away, and Natalie quietly packed a suitcase. She avoided telling many people about her plans because she no longer knew whom Daniel might contact. As she zipped the suitcase, her phone rang. Daniel? She almost declined the call. Then she answered. "I want to apologize," he said. Natalie said nothing. "I know I handled everything badly. I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have said. You threatened me. I was scared." "Of what?" There was a pause. "Of losing everything." Natalie closed her eyes. Daniel continued, his voice softer now. "Please meet me once. Let me explain everything. After that, I'll leave you alone." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to refuse. But part of her still wanted an explanation. She wanted to hear Daniel admit what he had done without excuses. She wanted the relationship to have an ending that belonged to her, not to fear. "Where?" she asked. Daniel named a rural property owned through one of his businesses, nearly an hour outside town. He described it as an old storage facility that was rarely used. Natalie hesitated. "Why there?" "Because nobody will interrupt us." That answer should have stopped her. Instead, Natalie agreed. She told herself she was going there to end everything. The property stood beyond a narrow road surrounded by empty fields. The building looked abandoned, with weathered walls and dark windows. Wind moved through the dry grass as Natalie parked. Daniel was already waiting. He stood beside his vehicle with his hands in his pockets. "You came." "I said I would." For a moment, neither moved. Then Daniel walked inside. Natalie followed, keeping several feet between them. The building smelled of dust and old wood. Their footsteps echoed through the empty interior. Daniel turned toward her. "I never wanted this to happen. You wanted an affair. You wanted me to wait while you lied to your wife. I told you I was going to leave her. You never filed for divorce." Daniel's expression hardened. "You don't know everything. I know enough." He stepped closer. "You destroyed my family." "No, Daniel. Your lies did." His jaw tightened. "You think telling Laura made you innocent?" "I never said I was innocent. I said I deserved the truth too." Daniel looked away, breathing heavily. Natalie reached into her bag. "I kept everything." His eyes returned to her. "What?" "Messages. Photographs. Voice recordings. Dates. Everything you sent me." Daniel stared at the bag. "You wouldn't. I already told Laura about the affair. If something happens to me, other people will get the rest." Something changed in his face. The calm expression disappeared. "You're threatening me." "I'm protecting myself." Daniel moved toward her. Natalie stepped backward. "Don't come any closer. You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." His voice rose. "You're going to ruin my life. You ruined it yourself." The argument exploded into shouting. Natalie turned toward the door. Daniel grabbed her arm. She pulled away. "Let me go!" The building swallowed her voice. Her phone slipped from her hand and struck the floor. The screen went dark. Natalie reached for it, but Daniel stepped between her and phone. She backed away, searching his face for the man she believed she loved. What she saw was no longer affection, guilt, or regret. It was desperation. And then, inside that isolated building, everything became suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. The silence that followed inside the abandoned building did not last forever, but for Natalie's family, The hours after she disappeared seemed to have no end. Natalie was supposed to leave town that morning. Her suitcase had been packed, her friend was expecting her, and her family assumed she had simply changed her plans. When she failed to answer calls, concern began replacing curiosity. By evening, her sister had called several times. No answer. The next morning, there was still nothing. Natalie had never disappeared without telling someone. Her phone went directly to voicemail. Her apartment was locked, and her car was gone. Her family contacted the police. At first, officers treated the situation as a missing person case. There was no confirmed evidence that Natalie had been harmed. Adults sometimes left without explaining themselves, and investigators needed more than fear to declare a crime. But one detail immediately troubled them. Natalie had planned to leave town. She had not. Meanwhile, Daniel Reeves appeared unusually composed. When questioned, he claimed he had not seen Natalie since their relationship ended. "I haven't spoken to her," he told officers. The statement sounded convincing until Laura remembered the days following Natalie's message. Daniel had been furious. He had paced through the house, made several private calls, and warned Laura that Natalie was dangerous. Laura had ignored those details while trying to understand the collapse of her marriage. Now they felt different. "If Daniel says he hadn't spoken to Natalie," Laura told investigators, "then why was he so afraid of what she might do?" That question became important. Then, early the following morning, firefighters were called to a rural property outside town. Flames had been reported near an abandoned storage building. By the time crews arrived, much of the structure had already been damaged. Smoke drifted over the fields, and the smell of burned material hung heavily in the cold air. Inside, investigators discovered human remains. The condition of the body made immediate identification impossible. Detectives examining the scene quickly noticed that the fire appeared unusual. Certain areas had burned far more intensely than others. Evidence that might normally have survived was destroyed, suggesting the fire had not simply been an accident. Someone may have wanted the scene erased. That possibility brought Detective Maya Bennett into the investigation. Maya was experienced enough to know that fires could destroy evidence, but they could also reveal intent. She began by reconstructing the victim's last known movements and comparing them with the timeline of Natalie's disappearance. The abandoned property was connected to Daniel's business. That fact changed the case. Maya reviewed surveillance footage, phone records, vehicle movements, and witness statements. Each piece seemed small by itself. Together, they began forming a troubling pattern. Daniel had claimed he had not seen Natalie. Yet investigators found evidence placing his vehicle near the property. Maya did not confront him immediately. She wanted the truth before giving him an opportunity to reshape it. Instead, she contacted Natalie's family. The request was devastating. They needed DNA samples. Natalie's mother sat silently as the explanation was given. Her sister began crying before the detective finished speaking. Everyone understood what the request meant, even though nobody wanted to say it aloud. A missing woman was one thing. A burned body was another. The samples were collected and sent for forensic comparison. For the next several hours, Maya continued working through Natalie's final days. She found evidence that Natalie had intended to leave town, evidence that she had been frightened, and evidence suggesting Daniel had known more about her plans than he admitted. The confirmation changed the case from a disappearance into a homicide investigation. Maya knew that every unanswered question now carried greater weight. Where had Natalie died? Who had started the fire? And why had Daniel lied so confidently about seeing her? Those questions would shape everything. Then the laboratory called. Maya answered the phone inside the precinct. She listened without speaking. When the call ended, she slowly closed her eyes. The remains were almost certainly Natalie's. The missing woman now had a name. And for her family, the uncertainty was over. But for Detective Maya Bennett, the real investigation had only begun. The confirmation that the burn victim was almost certainly Natalie changed everything. Until then, Daniel Reeves had occupied the uncomfortable position of former lover and possible witness. Now, with Natalie presumed dead, every statement he made carried a different weight. Daniel understood that immediately. When Detective Maya Bennett questioned him, he arrived with an attorney and a carefully prepared story. Natalie, he said, had become emotionally unstable after their relationship ended. She had talked about leaving town, starting over, and escaping the pressure surrounding the affair. "I was worried about her," Daniel said. Maya watched him carefully. "You were worried enough to meet her?" Daniel paused. "I didn't meet her. But you knew she was planning to leave. She told me that before we ended things." Maya wrote something in her notebook. Daniel insisted the affair had ended days before Natalie's disappearance. He claimed they had exchanged angry words, but nothing more. According to him, Natalie had become obsessed with exposing him and then vanished on her own. It was a simple story. Almost too simple. Maya began checking the details. Daniel said he had been at home during the evening Natalie disappeared. His wife remembered him leaving briefly, but Daniel later described that absence as a quick drive to buy cigarettes. Phone records showed his phone had connected to a tower much farther from his neighborhood. When Maya asked about it, Daniel changed his explanation. "I may have driven around for a while." Earlier, he had said he stayed home. The contradiction was small, but Maya had learned that small contradictions often mattered more than dramatic accusations. Surveillance footage provided another problem. A camera near a highway captured Daniel's vehicle traveling toward the rural property around the time investigators believed the fire had started. Daniel initially said he had never driven that road that night. Then he said he might have. Then he claimed he could not remember. Maya did not tell him that investigators were already building a timeline. Laura became an unexpected part of that timeline. She had spent days struggling with humiliation and grief. But when detectives asked whether Daniel had contacted her after Natalie revealed the affair, she remembered several messages. She handed over her phone. "I didn't know these would matter," she said. Maya examined the messages carefully. One had been sent shortly after Natalie contacted Laura. Daniel had written that Natalie was trying to destroy everything. The timestamp was important. Daniel had previously told investigators that he did not know Natalie had contacted Laura until much later. Laura stared at the screen. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew immediately." Maya nodded. The message suggested Daniel had been monitoring the situation from the beginning. Further investigation revealed another troubling detail. Shortly before Natalie's disappearance, Daniel had purchased heavy-duty plastic sheeting, industrial cleaning supplies, and other materials that investigators believed could potentially be used to conceal or destroy evidence. None of the purchases proved murder by themselves. But together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Maya requested a search of Daniel's vehicle. Forensic technicians examined the seats, floor mats, trunk, and interior surfaces. They found traces of ash and debris inconsistent with Daniel's explanation of where he had been. Then came the discovery that changed the investigation again. Tiny particles recovered from the vehicle contained material matching debris from the burned rural property. Maya stood beside the evidence table as the technician explained the preliminary findings. Daniel had said he never went there. The vehicle said otherwise. For the first time, Maya believed Daniel's carefully constructed alibi was beginning to collapse. Maya studied photographs from the property. The fire had destroyed much, but not everything. If Daniel had gone there, something could connect him to Natalie. She intended to find it. And somewhere inside the collapsing story was the answer to the question everyone was asking. What had happened to Natalie after her phone went silent? The answer began emerging from the ashes. Forensic investigators returned to the rural property after the first examination and searched the scene again, this time with Natalie's identity confirmed. They mapped burn patterns, collected fragments from the surrounding ground, and examined areas that appeared untouched by the flames. What they discovered was significant. Natalie had not died where her body was found. The evidence suggested that her body had been moved before the fire. Objects had been rearranged, surfaces had been disturbed, and portions of the property appeared deliberately altered. Whoever created the scene had wanted investigators to believe something different had happened there. But fire could destroy evidence without destroying every mistake. The examination also uncovered traces of fuel residue in locations where it would not have accumulated after a blaze. Investigators found that several surfaces had been wiped before the fire, suggesting someone had tried to remove fingerprints or biological material. The pattern mattered because it showed preparation rather than panic. Maya understood that the person responsible had not reacted to a death. Someone had taken steps afterward, moving the body, damaging the scene, and attempting to make the truth difficult to recover. Every destroyed detail seemed to point toward one conclusion: this had been planned. Detective Maya Bennett began looking closely at Daniel's actions after Natalie disappeared. Investigators learned that he had deleted messages, changed portions of his timeline, and contacted people who could potentially support his alibi. He had tried to erase the story before police could reconstruct it. Instead, those efforts were becoming part of the story. Technicians examined Natalie's damaged phone, recovered from the property. Much of it had been destroyed, but specialists managed to retrieve fragments from its memory. Several deleted messages appeared. One had been sent shortly before Natalie disappeared. "I'm meeting Daniel. I don't know if I should go." Another fragment followed minutes later. "If anything happens, please remember I was afraid of him." Maya read the recovered message twice. Natalie had known she was walking into something dangerous. She had warned someone. And she had gone anyway. Investigators identified the recipient and confirmed that Natalie had discussed Daniel before leaving town. The conversation supported what her family had already suspected. She had not vanished voluntarily. Daniel's attorney argued that recovered messages could not prove what happened inside the building. Daniel maintained that Natalie had become emotional, that their meeting had been an argument, and that he had left her alive. Maya did not accept the explanation. The accumulated evidence was now too strong to ignore. Daniel was arrested. As officers placed handcuffs around his wrists, he remained remarkably calm. "I didn't kill her," he said. Nobody answered. At the station, Daniel sat across from Maya inside an interrogation room. A recorder captured every word. "You've told us several versions of your timeline," Maya said. "I was confused. You lied about going to the property." "No. We have evidence placing your vehicle there." "That doesn't mean I killed Natalie." Maya placed photographs on the table. Then she placed copies of the recovered messages beside them. Daniel stared at the screen. His expression changed. Maya continued. "She was afraid before she met you. She told someone where she was going. She told them she was afraid of you." Daniel swallowed. "That doesn't prove anything." "No," Maya said quietly. "But your lies are beginning to." He looked down. For the first time since the investigation began, Daniel had no immediate answer. His carefully rehearsed confidence was gone. The room became silent. Maya watched him closely, knowing that silence could reveal more than another question. Daniel finally raised his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "The truth." He looked toward the one-way mirror. For several seconds he said nothing. Then his shoulders dropped. And Maya realized the man who had spent weeks controlling the story was finally running out of places to hide. The silence in the interrogation room lasted almost a minute before Daniel finally spoke. "I met Natalie," he said. It was the first complete change in his story. Maya did not react. She simply waited. Daniel claimed he had gone to the property because Natalie had demanded one final conversation. According to him, she was furious, emotional, and threatening to expose everything. He said their argument became chaotic, that Natalie fell during the confrontation, and that he panicked. "I never meant to kill her," he whispered. Maya studied him. "Then explain what happened afterward." Daniel looked away. Investigators had already reconstructed much of that night. His vehicle had traveled to the property. His phone had been near the area. Natalie's damaged phone contained messages indicating she feared him. Evidence from the building showed that the fire had been deliberately started. Most importantly, Daniel had not called for help. Instead, he had moved Natalie's body, altered the scene, and attempted to erase communications connecting them. Maya placed photographs across the table. "You didn't just panic, Daniel. You made decisions." He shook his head. "I was terrified. You bought materials before she disappeared. I didn't know what would happen. You deleted messages after she died." Daniel said nothing. "You moved her body." His breathing became uneven. "You started the fire. I didn't want anyone to know." The words escaped before Daniel could stop them. Maya leaned forward. "Why?" Daniel stared at the table. "Because everything was going to be destroyed. Your marriage. My life." He finally looked up. "Natalie was going to tell everyone. My clients. My family. Laura. She had evidence. So you killed her to protect yourself?" Daniel's face tightened. "I didn't plan for her to die. But once she did, you decided to hide it." He lowered his head. The distinction mattered. Whether the killing had begun as an argument or something more deliberate, Daniel had made calculated choices afterward. He had concealed the body, burned the property, deleted messages, and constructed an alibi. The investigation was no longer simply about his presence. It was about what he did with the truth. By the time prosecutors reviewed the evidence, the case had become devastatingly clear. Daniel's final movements connected him to Natalie. The property connected him to the fire. His digital activity connected him to the attempt to erase their relationship. Meanwhile, Laura was asked whether she would support Daniel. She sat silently for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No." The prosecutor asked if she believed her husband had been responsible for Natalie's death. Laura looked toward the floor. "I don't know everything," she said. "But I know he lied to me. I know he lied to her. And I know I will not lie for him." Her decision carried a quiet finality. For years, Daniel had depended on other people protecting the image he had created. Laura would not protect it anymore. And without her silence, the final version of Daniel's story was beginning to collapse. As Maya left the room, Daniel remained behind, staring at his hands. The confidence that had carried him through every interview had disappeared. He had spent months believing that money, charm, and carefully chosen words could keep consequences away. Now every attempt to control the truth had become evidence against him. Outside, Laura received a call from investigators. She answered and listened. When they asked whether she was prepared to testify, she closed her eyes. "Yes," she said. For the first time, she understood that telling the truth would not save her marriage. It would free her from it. The courtroom was full when Daniel Reeves was brought in. Months had passed since Natalie Harper disappeared, since the fire had turned an abandoned property into a crime scene, and since investigators had slowly reconstructed the truth from fragments that Daniel believed would never be found. Now, the evidence that had once existed in private files was being presented before strangers. Daniel entered wearing a dark suit, his expression controlled. For a moment, He looked like the businessman people had known before the headlines. That image was exactly what his defense wanted the jury to remember. The prosecution wanted them to remember something else. A woman who had trusted him. A wife he had deceived. And a fire that could not erase what he had done. Laura was among the first important witnesses. She described the day Natalie contacted her, and the shock of seeing photographs, messages, and details that proved Daniel had been living two separate lives. Her voice trembled as she explained how quickly he changed after the affair became public. "He told me she was obsessed with him," Laura said. "He made me believe she was trying to destroy us." The prosecutor asked what Laura eventually discovered. "That he had been lying to both of us." She described the messages Daniel had sent, his changing explanations, and the fear she noticed after Natalie threatened to reveal more evidence. She told the jury that Daniel had not behaved like a man protecting his marriage. He was protecting himself. Natalie's family followed. Her sister described waiting for Natalie to return, calling her phone repeatedly, and refusing to believe that the woman who planned to leave town had simply disappeared. Her mother spoke about the devastating moment investigators requested DNA samples. The courtroom became silent. "She told the truth," Natalie's mother said. "And she paid for it with her life." The defense tried to challenge that picture. Their attorney described Natalie as emotionally vulnerable and suggested that the relationship had become complicated after she realized Daniel would not leave his wife. They argued that Daniel had been frightened, overwhelmed, and caught inside a confrontation that spiraled beyond his control. But the prosecution presented another pattern: threatening messages, deleted communications, a false timeline, a vehicle connected to the burned property, materials purchased before Natalie's disappearance, and evidence showing deliberate efforts to destroy what remained after her death. The prosecutor reminded the jury that panic might explain a terrible decision, but it did not explain every decision that followed. Daniel had opportunities to call for help. He did not. He had opportunities to tell the truth. He lied. He had opportunities to preserve evidence. He destroyed it. During closing arguments, Daniel finally looked toward Laura. She did not look back. The jury deliberated for several hours. When they returned, Daniel stood. The verdict was read. Guilty. The words seemed to hang in the courtroom. Daniel's shoulders dropped. Laura closed her eyes. Natalie's family held each other. Justice had finally arrived, but it did not feel like victory. Nothing could restore Natalie's voice, her plans, or the life she should have lived. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited as Laura stepped into the afternoon light. She paused before walking away. The trial was over. But the damage Daniel had created was not. For those who loved Natalie, the verdict closed one chapter of the nightmare. It also opened another, learning how to live with the truth. And for Laura, freedom came with grief, because surviving Daniel meant accepting that the man she loved had never been the man she believed him to be fully. The verdict had ended the trial, but it did not end the consequences. Weeks later, Daniel stood before a judge and received a lengthy prison sentence for Natalie's murder and the destruction of evidence. The courtroom was quieter than it had been during the trial. There were no dramatic arguments now, only the weight of what had already been proven. Daniel listened without expression. Laura did not attend. She had already begun building a life without him. The first thing she did was remove his belongings from their home. His clothes went into boxes. Photographs disappeared from the walls. Business papers were packed away. Even the coffee mug he had used every morning was placed inside a cabinet. None of it felt satisfying. It felt like mourning. Laura had not simply lost a husband. She had lost the version of her past she thought she understood. Memories that once brought comfort now carried questions. How long had he lied? How many promises had been empty? How often had she mistaken manipulation for love? She began answering those questions slowly, without Daniel. Natalie's family chose a different way to remember her. They established a small foundation dedicated to helping people recognize warning signs in controlling and abusive relationships. The organization offered information, support, and resources for people who felt trapped by threats, emotional manipulation, or fear. They named it the Natalie Harper Foundation. Her sister spoke at the first gathering. Natalie wanted the truth, she said. We want other people to have the courage and support to seek help before fear becomes their normal. For Detective Maya Bennett, closing the case was more complicated. She returned one final time to the rural property. The building had been cleared, but traces of the fire remained. Charred boards lay where investigators had once searched for evidence, reminders of how desperately someone had tried to erase the past. Maya knew the investigation had been about more than proving Daniel guilty. It had been about understanding what happened when betrayal, control, fear, and obsession collided. Natalie had exposed the affair because she believed the truth would end the deception. Instead, it triggered a chain of events that ended her life. That was the tragedy at the center of the case. Natalie believed telling Laura would finally destroy the secret. She was right. The secret ended, but Daniel's need to control the consequences became more dangerous than the secret itself. He tried to silence Natalie. He tried to erase the evidence. He tried to rewrite the story. He failed. Years later, the photographs, messages, testimony, and forensic records remained. The fire had destroyed physical evidence, but it could not destroy memory. Laura carried the truth. Natalie's family carried her name. Maya carried the case. And Natalie's story remained a warning. Sometimes, the most dangerous moment is not when a secret is discovered, but when someone realizes they can no longer control who knows it. In the month that followed, the Foundation received letters from strangers who said Natalie's story had made them reconsider relationships they had once accepted as normal. Some described partners who demanded passwords. Others described threats disguised as promises, apologies followed by intimidation, and affection that became conditional upon obedience. Laura eventually began speaking publicly about manipulation, not because she wanted attention, but because she understood how easily control could hide behind ordinary marriage. She never described herself as fearless. She simply learned that fear did not have to make decisions for her anymore. Maya kept a photograph of the case file on her desk until the investigation was officially archived. When she finally closed the folder, she understood that closure did not mean forgetting. It meant knowing the truth had been documented, preserved, and heard. Natalie could not speak for herself anymore. Others would speak for her. And that was the one thing Daniel could never burn away. Her name would remain attached not to the violence that ended her life, but to the courage that came before it. That distinction mattered to everyone who survived the aftermath and carried her memory forward after headlines faded.